Coming up, Tony Pauline has released his big board update, his top prospects, over 1,000 prospects graded following the Senior Bowl. What are his overarching thoughts on this year's class? What movement have we seen, and who should we be watching out for over the next several weeks? Tony, you released your big board update following the Senior Bowl. On this update, over 1,000 players. Obviously, that list has been pared down a bit based on those returning to school. You mentioned that it could pare down even more if seniors take advantage of this unique NCAA rule this year because of COVID and all the pandemic stuff going on. But in this update, you have 24 players with solid first-round grades. You have 35 players with late first and early second-round grades. You have 119 players graded as day one or day two selections, and 303 players with draftable grades. What are your kind of general overarching thoughts on this year's class as a whole as you continue to study film and look at all these different pieces that come together?
In the early part, especially in the first 20 selections, it looks like it's going to be a very offensive draft. Offensive tackles, quarterbacks, receivers like a year ago, primarily offense. It's going to be tough to get defensive players in the early part of the draft. Not too many defensive linemen, really no defensive tackles. The cornerbacks are going to be a reach. Maybe a couple of linebackers, David Collins, as well as of Tulsa, as well as Dylan Moses of Alabama. Now, people say, well, you got 303 guys with draftable grades. Only 255 guys are selected. That's true. What happens is, especially with the underclassmen, want to see what their true measurables are, want to see what their actual 40 times are. Got to see what the medicals are. If any guy has a medical red flag, see what I'm hearing about interviews. That will basically pair or bring the list down from 303 draftable players to 255 players. Also knock some guys out of day two range. We're looking about probably moving about 19, 20 players out of day two range. Most of the film's been done. I'm moving through the SEC film. But again, with so many underclassmen that have entered, and you don't know what the true measurables are. We really don't know what a lot of the measurables are for the seniors because there's going to be no combine this year. There's no shrine game. There were no, except for the Senior Bowl and the Hula Bowl, there were no real pre-draft all-star games. So it's until those pro days take place, and hopefully they all do take place, we're not even going to know a lot of the true measurables for the seniors.
And don't forget the NFL Combine also not taking place in their traditional sense this year as well. And don't forget about the priority free agents as well, where teams specifically don't draft them in the 7th round. It's kind of a weird game here, but teams will set their PFAs. They won't draft them in the 7th round because they think they have them locked up in that whole game of chess that goes on during that 7th round and, of course, right after the draft. Let's focus on a few positions. Let's focus on edge. Let's focus on wide receiver. And let's focus on quarterback, or at least the top of the board for quarterbacks. But let's start with edge rushers. Kwity Paye of Michigan, Carlos Basham of Wake Forest, Jalen Phillips of Miami, and Joseph Asai of Texas. You have them all graded as potential late first, early second round picks. Yeah. You've been praising Basham since last year. What are your thoughts on him and how he can continue his trek to the NFL here?
Yeah, exceptional player. I mean, he's instinctive, he's tough, he's athletic, explosive, really the complete package. A guy who may have slid into the late part of round one had he entered the 2020 draft, went back to Wake Forest, had a good year, had a good week of practices at the Senior Bowl. Now, Basham doesn't have eye-popping numbers, but that's because Wake Forest uses him in a variety of roles. They don't just send him up the field mindlessly to rush the passer. They have him playing space. They have him playing coverage. They have him drop off the line. He's good in pursuit. And again, I mean, he reads the action and he gets the action. He looks to annihilate opposing ball handlers. The thing about Basham, when I noticed on film, is he seems to lose an edge when he comes out of a three-point stance. He seems a lot more explosive, a lot more productive, a lot more sudden flashing on the scene when he stands over tackle, and he's playing as a basically stand-up 3-4 outside linebacker. So it's going to be interesting to see come draft day if a team late in round one, a team that may need an edge rusher who uses a four-man line primarily, takes Carlos Basham. I think that would be a mistake. I think he's more of a natural 3-4 outside linebacker. I think he's much more explosive in that position. I think the tape bears that out. But again, we've seen time and time again where teams are looking for pass rushers. And even though the guys, may have stood up in college or other way around, maybe they come out of a three-point stance and you want them to stand up, they try and basically coach them to play a position that they're not used to or that's not natural to them.
Edge rushers are a premium. We know that. Offensive tackles are a premium. You mentioned that the top half of round one is going to be an offensive heavy draft. So we'll see if a guy like Basham can sneak into the bottom half of round one. Let's move over to wide receiver, at least the top of the board here. Jamar Chase, LSU, continues to be your wide receiver one. You've been staying steady on him. Yeah. Even after Devontae Smith won the Heisman, even after he had an impressive national championship performance before getting injured in that game. Talk to us about Jamar Chase. If he played this year, Tony, and I was having this conversation with someone today, if Jamar Chase played this year, would we even be having this kind of discussion about Chase or Smith for the Dolphins or anyone in those top 5, top 10 picks?
Well, it'll be interesting because, LSU had a lot of problems this year. LSU was not a good team this year. LSU had a lot of issues at quarterback. They started a freshman and it was up and down. So, the Jamar Chase we would have seen in 2020 obviously would not have been the same playmaking Jamar Chase on a consistent basis as we saw in 2019 when Joe Burrow was throwing him the ball. Like we saw Devontae Smith. Basically, Devontae Smith was better in 2020 than he was in 2019. Almost, he had Tua for a large part of 2019, but he also had that rapport with Mac Jones. But the fact is this, is Jamar Chase, I believe, he's a terrific downfield threat. He's got legitimate long speed. He is a very reliable underneath receiver. He goes up in the crowd. He also has a much stouter build. He's probably a little bit shorter than Devonta Smith, but he's also stouter. He's also stronger. And we saw when Devonta Smith didn't want to weigh in during Senior Bowl practices and concerns about his size, that's going to be another red flag. That's not an issue for Jamar Chase. And the other thing is we know this much. LSU receivers are good on the college level, and then oftentimes they turn out to be great in the NFL. They're better pro receivers than they are college receivers, which is why all along I've had Jamar Chase ranked as my number one receiver. It's not even been close for me. I just think he projects well, or projects better than Devonta Smith does to the next level. I think Devonta Smith is going to be a legitimate and a very good NFL prospect, but I think with Devonta Smith is it's more scheme specific. I don't think every team in the NFL is looking at Devonta Smith as selecting him and just plugging him into the system. I think the number of teams that like Devonta Smith for their system is significantly less than the teams that think, hey, listen, we can take a guy like Jamar Chase and plug him in and he'll play immediately for us.
Remember, Tony, Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, 2 LSU receivers that come to mind. Good at the college level, great in the NFL. I think it's going to be a very interesting debate as we continue on. And if you check out our YouTube channel, there's a mailbag segment here that we talk about Rondale Moore. So check that video out as well. And that guy's going to be moving up the draft boards too. Let's shift over to the quarterback discussion, Tony. Justin Fields remains your quarterback too. Zach Wilson flying up the draft boards amongst media members, but you have been on Zach Wilson. You've been high on him since the beginning of the college football season, ahead of everyone else. Will he eventually surpass Fields as pro days take place in your rankings, or is it more about what a team think might be a better fit? I know you've mentioned previously, well, do you want the brains or do you want the bigger arm? So basically what I'm asking is how far is the gap between him and Wilson?
I don't think it's very big, and I think it'll be determined on how Justin Fields does on the whiteboard, how teams come away after they interview Justin Fields, whether it be in person or whether it be via Zoom meetings, figure that, hey, yeah, this guy is going to be able to process things quickly. This guy is going to be able to handle the complex offense. I talked in another segment about Drew Lock, the Denver Broncos, not being able to handle a complex offense, which is a concern for so many people in Denver. Can Justin Fields handle the complex offense? When it comes down to physical skills, specifically arm strength, I think Justin Fields is head and shoulders above Zach Wilson. But as I said, literally back in November, when Wilson was making a big charge of draft boards, and I said that there are some people who think that 2 or 3 years down the road, Zach Wilson is going to be a much better quarterback than Justin Fields. It's because of the way Wilson is able to process things much quicker, his reads, basically make his decisions quicker. When you go through that interview process and teams are putting things up on the board and asking Justin Fields questions about the complexity of the offense, what would you do? What's going to happen here? When you come out of those meetings, that I think will be the determining factor as to who is the number 2 quarterback, whether it be Zach Wilson or Justin Fields. And remember, just because Justin Fields may be selected before Zach Wilson or vice versa, that doesn't mean that's the way it's going to turn out 2 or 3 years down the road. Again, it'll depend on the system. it'll depend on the coaching as well.
We have seen that way too often where the quarterback that goes after is actually the better prospect. It's an inexact science. The NFL draft is an inexact science. Tony, we'll have more updates on your board as we get closer to the NFL draft, so please keep your eye out on that at ProFootball.com and on our social media platform and 360 on Twitter.